Hello, and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast with me, George Brown.
And me, Chris Horn.
How's it going?
All right. I'm still here, George. Fighting various things going around, as you know, but otherwise I'm good.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of stuff going around. Both of my kids have been ill this week, and I was not terribly well one day as well, so that's how it is. But we had a nice day out the other day.
We did. We went fishing, didn't we?
We did.
Doing your activity.
Yeah, more my scene than yours.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know if you saw me cast, but it all came back super quick in that, it was there all fine. Just like the final bit of when to strike and all that sort of stuff, I was definitely rusty there.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't actually see you fishing at all.
Didn't you?
No, I was off on my own most of the time.
Well, it was like poetry. Yeah.
Doggerel. Yes. Did you catch a fish? I can't remember.
Of course not.
Did you not?
You caught quite a lot, didn't you?
I did, and I actually bopped one on the head, and I'm currently conducting a cold smoking experiment, my first ever attempt. So,
how's it going?
Well, I have to keep turning around every now and again to make sure there's still smoke coming out the top of it, because it's gone out a couple of times. But so far, it seems to be working. So we're on now hour 6 of a 12-hour smoke. So it'll be ready later this evening.
What's the recipe? How are you doing it?
Okay, so it's a dry brine, 50% mixture of brown sugar and salt, which you leave on for, I can't remember how many hours now. Then you rinse, and that's in the fridge. Then you rinse it off and you put it in the fridge for 12 hours to develop what's called the pellicle, which is like a kind of sticky surface. And it's kind of that the smoke sticks to. And then you put it in the smoker for 12 hours, is the theory. And you end up with cold smoked trout.
And are you just gonna grab the trout, hold one end by the tail, one end by the head, and just eat it like a sausage roll type thing?
Well, no. So I took the fillets off.
Okay.
So then they're hanging in the smoker now, and then it'll just be like a side of smoked salmon, just half the size, and nice. A guilt-free alternative to smoked salmon as well.
Definitely on its day, if you do it right, I think that beats it.
It's certainly right up there. The
problem with smoked salmon is it is very good. But if more people would try smoked trout, that would be wonderful.
Here. Anyway, enough about my adventures in smoking. You better tell everyone who our guest is.
Absolutely. So this is an eclectic intro coming up. Today we've got a former soldier in the household cavalry, a former horse dealer, and an amateur whip for the corn hunt, a hedgelayer, and that's a major part of what he does now, conservationist at heart, I reckon, a writer in things like The Critic, Shooting Times, Suffolk and Norfolk Life, Suffolk Magazine, a scribe pounder, most importantly to us, and now a published author, well, soon to be published author, and he can let us know a bit about that in a minute. His book, Words from the Hedge, A Hedgelayer's View of the Countryside, is due to be released next May. So, in that vein, put down your billhooks, lay down the chainsaw, and put your hands together for a big warm welcome to Richard Negus.
Hello and welcome me to your podcast. I sound much more interesting from you than I do myself.
Which of those things are you most passionate about?
Oh, well, I suppose the hedge laying and conservation go hand in hand. So true. I guess those two things, that's my greatest notoriety, I suppose some localized fame, is because I'm that oddball who lays hedges. And and the longer I do it for a living, and I've solely done it for a living now for 10 years, is the more I realize of just how beneficial the work that my business partner and I do is for conservation on farms and shoots and estates here across East Anglia. It's very, very reassuring to me that what you do each day for a living does a lot of good.
Yeah.
It must be very rewarding. I always think with anything where you start at one end of a thing and then you work your way down it, that you can kind of see what you've achieved over the course of or not achieved, as I suppose the case may be. But it is nice when you can look back and go, oh, yeah, I did all of that today.
Oh, holy. It's like, when you mow the lawn and you sort of stand back and go, look at all those stripes. Is that? But then, of course, if you mow the lawn now, you get the sort of a fatwa placed upon you because you haven't been involved in no mow May. But yes. So I'll tell you a very peculiar thing, actually, is that, a lot of our hedge laying, we're doing what's called a conservation style, and that doesn't involve very many stakes. It involves no binding whatsoever. It's solely done so that it thickens up either a newer planted hedge or one which has been coppiced 4 or 5 years ago, and then all the growths come back, and then you lay it in. It is solely, as the name dictates, it's purely and simply for conservation purposes. All the old hedge laying styles you see with the beautiful bindings, regimental stakes, and all that sort of stuff, that they stem from livestock farming. They were the means of turning a hedge into a livestock-proof barrier. And it's actually quite fascinating is that whenever I put one of the pictures of our more traditionally staked and bound hedges, which are very aesthetically beautiful, but you couldn't get more human interventionist if you tried. It's quite interesting of just how many of the sort of rewilding aficionados go, oh, isn't that wonderful? And you think, well, that's as far away from rewilding as you could possibly get, because, a hedge is a man-made thing. There is no such thing as a hedge in nature. It's a man-made construct. And there's us then managing that hedge with a very, very interventionist way of coppicing stakes, coppicing binders, bringing those to that site, putting them in place so we can lay stake and bind a hedge so that it can be better for a farming practice. Yet it is strange. It's one of those things that people go, isn't that beautiful? And isn't it great? And I suppose it is, but it does make me chuckle.
It's so interesting, and I want to talk a lot more about hedge laying styles and the history of hedges and all that kind of stuff a bit later on. But first, I want to ask you, what's that you're drinking?
Oh, now, I went to the Suffolk show yesterday, and this is called Ollie's Liqueur. And as you know, it is actually the law whenever you go to any county show that you have to buy cheeses which then infest your fridge, making it smell like you've sort of the French army's invaded, and a strange drink. But this is made by the Heart of Suffolk Distillery, who are just down the road from me. Some great friends of mine run it. And this is their latest offering, whereby they've distilled this thing, Ollie's Liqueur, which is basically a bit of an amaretto. So it's almost a liqueur. So my wife actually designed the labels for all these, and they are lovely. They actually make really good stuff. There was everyone a few years back made gin. It seemed to be that everyone, and you had to ride a bicycle with stupid handlebars and a great beard and dress like a lumberjack, even though you wouldn't know which end of a chainsaw was the sharp end. But these guys were the legitimate thing. And the funny thing is that actually Martin, who was the sort of leading brainchild behind this, he's actually our plumber as well. So he's got one of the best stills you can ever imagine. So nothing goes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like Captain Nemo's quarterdeck on his place, and it's good. Yeah.
I was imagining something, made of bits of old toilet and.
Well, he did try and make one actually. I picked him some quinces from a tree I was doing a hedge in a garden, and I picked him some quinces, which he thought would be quite nice to make quince gin, and it tasted like toilet duck. And I have actually drunk toilet duck back when I was playing rugby back in the old days, and I can assure you, it's not something you want to do. But this amaretto one, I can assure you, Ollie's Liqueur is the stuff for me. Although I wouldn't usually, I'll be honest, drink it probably at this sort of time in the afternoon. But I made an exception for you guys because I love you.
I'm so jealous of you at Suffolk show. Bizarrely, I found a picture yesterday of myself and my sister. I was about 9 at the Suffolk show, and brought back a lot of fond memories, as did your article on Scripound the other day, which made me laugh a lot. So very good.
I love the Suffolk show. I am hugely parochial, and I'm very proud to be a man from Suffolk. I was born and bred here, but I think it's one of those things that you see around you that the show organisers are really clinging on and succeeding in keeping it as an agricultural show, whereas so many county shows have now sort of almost had to, for want of a better word, dumb their shows down so that they don't reflect agriculture. But because I suppose Suffolk is arable country. Where the bit I live in, 92% of our land mass is actually farmland. So, you have to reflect what is here, and that is largely wheat, oilseed rape, barley, sugar beet, and beans. And that's basically it. So I think the Suffolk Show still does do that, and hats off to them. And the Suffolk Agricultural Association, as my article said, is their other driver, is very much educating people, particularly youngsters, in how all that stuff growing in the field ends up on your plate.
Yeah. They still let Ipswich Town in, though.
Oh, yes. Premiership Ipswich Town?
Your Premiership Ipswich Town. Did you queue up at the tent to get a autograph from Harry Clark?
No.
Oh, that's a shame,
I didn't. No.
With all the other 5-year-olds.
Yeah, drinking my Ollie's liqueur. Come on. Let me through, kids. I'm very important.
I love an agricultural show as well. So being a proper ag show, presumably there were lots of big shiny tractors and other associated toys to have a look at and climb on.
Oh yes. I mean, honestly, some of those combines they've got are just so vast that they've now actually got a folding header that comes out. And you think, good God. I think though, to be honest, I think we've reached zenith. I don't think we're going to get any bigger. In fact, I think a lot of kit is going to start getting smaller again. So I think
you won't get them through the gates if they get any bigger.
Exactly.
But the only reason, let me just think about this, because I do not confess to be a farmer, but I'm assuming they got bigger so that you could be more efficient. You could just mow more, harvest more quickly, right?
Yeah. To give you an idea, we used to have, when I was growing up, we had 2 combines running at any given time, and it would take them 6 or 8 weeks to do the whole harvest. We now have a contractor who comes in who does 3 or 4 neighbouring farms, and he does the same area in about 6-7 full days of combining.
So, and obviously between weather, obviously that makes the whole thing vital. You can get in, get out, do what you need to do. However, I reckon they're going to get smaller, quicker, and fully automated. So no one goes out. The thing just starts when it needs to start, stops when it needs to stop, does what it needs to do. They're surely automating the whole of that in time.
I think that's precisely what's going to happen. I think there is eventually the human bit is only there to be there just in case the computer decides to stop working or the GPS loses connection with the vehicle. I mean, over at Nacton, which is just outside where the Suffolk Show is, they've got robot tractors doing all sorts of trials there that don't actually require an operator to sit in. And if you think about it, soil compaction, particularly now we're looking more at regenerative, methods of farming. Actually, a great big heavy behemoth of a thing that's going across a field looking like something out of a Star Wars movie is not good for soil compaction. So therefore things are getting lighter. And so therefore things are getting smaller again. But I mean, if you think about it, the number of people who actually work on the land, Sam Carlisle, another one of our scribe hound gang, he farms just down the road from me. And he said it's quite fascinating. When he looked at the number of people who used to work on the farm back in his grandfather's time and the sheer numbers there, he said, bizarrely, because they have a restaurant and the vineyard there, he said there's still the same number of people work on the estate. He said, but on the actual farm itself, there's 1.5 people. And all those other numbers to make it up are actually working in the restaurant and in the gift shop and all that stuff in his farm diversification thing. So
they've done a really good job with that diversification, haven't they? That's a proper model, because that's probably the benchmark, really, isn't it? Are you employing in some other way whilst being more effective, more efficient, more impact?
For sure.
That's impressive.
Bring back the scythe, that's what I say.
And the bill hook is, of course, as well along with it.
It made me think when you were talking about the robots, though. Like, we've had a robot on our garden, on the lawn, for a long time. And loads of people have got those now. So it is surely just a case of time. I know that's quite small scale, but...
I've been meaning to say this for ages. Instagram it obviously knows what I'm going to like, keeps showing me adverts for remote control lawnmowers that are shaped and operate like combines.
Yes, I've had those too.
Satisfying.
with a little whizzy light on the top.
Yeah. I mean, the full thing. Great.
Amazing.
Really want one.
if you're a real geek, you can just buy a remote control car combine and you can pull it alongside your remote control tractor. You can dump stuff into the trailer.
No.
Right, Chris. What are you drinking, Chris?
I'm copping out, and I apologise because I'm on some pretty strong antibiotics, plus some paracetamol, plus some decongestant. So I have some Twinings Earl Grey in my tractor mug from Emma Bridgewater. Look at that!
Seamless.
Can you identify those tractors?
Well, there's at least one Ford.
Yeah,
John Deere.
There's a Deere.
Is that a Fendt?
Yeah, no, that one there's that's an International. That one with the black bit on, isn't
it? We've turned into a farming podcast.
Very quick.
You could shoot well from an International.
This is true. So yeah, a lovely Earl Grey, and I will make up for it next time. How about you, George?
Well, I'm back to my usual tricks, and I'm on whiskey. But just to mix things up, I've got an Islay whiskey, which I think is pronounced something like Boonaven.
Boonahaben.
Yes, exactly. But that's not how it's spelled at all. It's 12 years old. It's sherry oaked. It's not peaty as you might expect from or at least it's not smoky as you might expect from an Islay whiskey, but it's extremely delicious. And it's nice to be having whiskey on a podcast again.
My wife used to work in whiskey, and Ardbeg was one of her brands she worked on. And we used to go each year up to the Islay Whiskey Festival. And there was that particular year when Ardbeg were hosting one day, they decided they were going to say this is a revolutionary spirit. So we all had to dress up like Che Guevara. But one of the guys in the distillery didn't get the memo. And he came dressed in a full Arabic dish dash instead. And we were all dressed as like sort of Cubans. And he had that. And they sort of went, well, you're supposed to be dressed up as that. And he goes, I'm in my fancy dress. And this is it. And he went, well, you're supposed to be like a terrorist and whatnot. He goes, I got that. I've got a gun. And he pulled out a Webley service revolver out of his pocket. And I said, can I have a look? And I thought, that's not been deactivated, has it? And he sort of proceeded to get merrily drunk with this Webley service revolver, dressed as in a full Arab get-up. And I thought, I think Islay's a bit different to the rest of the UK. They just don't care.
I love the idea of having just the one fancy dress outfit, and you just make it apply to all fancy dress themes.
Every occasion, just come dressed as an Arab. You'll be absolutely fine with a gun. Who's going to argue with a drunken Arab with a gun?
An illegal gun.
with an
illegally
Islay
held firearm. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, well, let's press on. So what we like to do now that we've all got a drink, Richard, is we turn to our mailbag with a segment called Whose Bird Is It Anyway? It's where we ask our listeners to send in their shooting quandaries and queries and questions, and we do our best to help them out. This episode's submission comes from somebody who I have named Muttley, who has written, I joined a small pheasant syndicate last year which ran successfully for many years pre-COVID. After a hiatus, we put birds back down last year and the returns were appalling, with the majority of birds seeming to have disappeared before the season even started. We're doing everything as before, and the only real difference of note is that there are more dog walkers using the farm now than there were in previous years. Thank you, COVID. We're surmising that dog walkers are allowing their dogs to roam through our penwood off the lead, which is potentially disturbing the birds several times a day and causing them to seek asylum on neighbouring properties. Our syndicate members have agreed to put up signage to encourage dog walkers to keep their dogs on a lead. Our dilemma is that of appropriate signage. Do we go with something emotive, perhaps some graphic images of the tragic victims of sheep worrying and a statement about shooting the four-legged perpetrators, or would a more subtle, livestock in fields and this area is home to ground-nesting birds, perhaps with a reminder that the disturbance of both is a crime, be more effective? There has also been a suggestion of a warning sign for nesting adders. I'm not sure there are any in our local area, but nevertheless, the thought of an adder bite might be enough to beguile unwitting walkers into keeping their dogs on the lead. The shoot has a lot of potential, and we're keen to make it a success. We would welcome any thoughts you have on the matter.
This is a great question, because this is very prevalent, I am sure, up and down the country now. And it's not an easy one to answer on the face of it, and I've seen a lot of different approaches to this. What are you thinking, Richard?
I think it's something I get on my high horse about because of the right to roam movement is one of the few things in life that makes me actually properly angry, because I think it's a hugely selfish thing. And particularly in landscapes whereby margins, hedgerows and margins are the king. And so therefore I've found that one of my neighbours here, Adam Steed, he won the East Anglian Grey Partridge Award from the GWCT the year before last. He has a fantastic wild bird shoot, and he really punches above his weight as a working conservationist. And he tried putting signs out with these birds nest here, and so he'd got pictures of grey partridge, pictures of lapwing, pictures of skylark, talking about ground nesting birds. And to be perfectly honest, most, even here out in the middle of rural Suffolk, they just ended up hoofed in the river, knocked over, ignored.
Gosh.
He set up, actually, one of the few things that did work was that when he was having difficulties with people sort of taking shortcuts, he put up trail cams, and then he would put slightly blurred out images on the Facebook page and saying, does anyone know who this is? Because they came through and their dog killed some lapwing, or broke some lapwing nests, and then put it on the local Facebook group. He sort of kept them anonymous enough, but in such small villages, everyone went, oh, that's Barbara, she's terrible, I can recognise her cockapoo everywhere. I like the idea about the adders, because I think it's something whereby people are scared. If you walk across Southwold Common, there's an old sign there that says warning adders on the heath, and as a child I used to sort of run through running all the way to Warberswick, petrified that I was going to be attacked by sort of whole packs of adders. I didn't think I ever saw one in my entire life, and I know there are out there, but I like the idea of actually saying adders, because I think, sad to say, the narrative of this is a conservation area just doesn't wash for most people, because most people don't actually give a monkeys. They want to have their dog have a walk, and then go and walk as where they will is much more important to them than any conservation implication.
It's sad that that's a very good example of the fact that the positive message probably doesn't work. I was really hoping that between us that we might be positive enough to think that maybe people do care, but yeah, you're right. And unfortunately, the most effective thing that is got to be what you just said, the trail cam thing, which is, I mean, that's some going, that.
Yeah, I do like that approach, though. The not quite name and shame is quite good. Yeah. I do think that's good. And what's also good about that is by sharing that image, you're not just telling that one individual, because, you know, our farm here is right on the edge of town, and there's a footpath goes right through the middle of it. And, you know, there's always people where they ought not be. And you can tell each individual. But Winchester's quite a big city. There's quite a lot of people. It's going to take us a jolly long time to get the message through to everyone. Whereas if you can put it on a Facebook group and that picture is seen by a couple of hundred people every time, say, then those 200 people are all thinking, oh, shit, ground nesting birds, is it? I better not go that way, because I especially don't want my picture to be put up on here either. I think it's very effective. We find that caution high-powered rifles in use is quite a good deterrent. Not as perfect as you might anticipate, but that's quite a good sign.
These are all great ideas. It's just so sad it has to come to this, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. Is it the case, do you think, that for some people, and I'd probably include myself in this, being told not to do something is sometimes a bit of a challenge? What do you mean, don't do it? I want to.
You're definitely in that category, George.
I think that's absolutely, and it also, I mean, the whole right to roam movement has, I mean, that they dress stuff up, that it's something all about that if people are in nature, they're somehow more imbued with nature and they're more likely to look after it. It's not. I mean, it's funny how that they constantly sort of get a bee in their bonnet about, I mean, look at one of the chaps there. He went on to the Duke of Norfolk's place and started smashing up larson traps and whatnot. And he did it because it's the Duke of Norfolk. There is definitely a sort of a landowner. All of a sudden, farmers become landowners, and they love putting oh, he's the 14th Duke of X or Y, owns this place amongst his other 16,000 acres. And there's very much a sort of thing of saying, well, they own all this, we only own that small thing. And although the right to roam movement is extreme in its very left-leaning stance, I think there is a slight feeling with the public is that, well, my garden's 50 metres by 50 metres and you've got 800 hectares here, surely you can spare some space for me, not realising that game and wildlife are actually so frequently actually wedged into this tiny narrow corridor of a grass margin, floristically enhanced margin, hedgerow, and then that leads on to a wood. And as Muttley says, it's something whereby doubtless they'll go and that dog's followed the line down one of these margins, then into a wood, and then hey presto, your birds have scarpered. I know my business partner Richard Gould was a gamekeeper, and he was very, very good at shepherding people about the farms. And what he did was he would mow rides to lead people away from where he wanted them to be. He said, make the smoothest, easiest ride to go that way. He said that you're not going to stop them. So shepherd them almost by making their walk easier to go down there. And, you know, he's 6'5" and he looks pretty menacing as well. So if he tells them once, they'll go, well, if I go that way, I'll be okay, because the nasty man in the pickup truck is down that way. And but personally, I would say that you can extol your conservation benefits that you're doing and the wildlife that will be disturbed till you're blue in the face. These individuals honestly don't give a toss.
Yeah. Just something you mentioned, I remember talking to Charlie Mellor, the head keeper at Arundel, and they talk about, I mean, they've fenced in the footpaths. Yeah. I mean, the Duke of Norfolk's gone to extreme lengths to protect what they've got there, but they really look after them and they explain, and they fence in the footpaths all over the place. So, I mean, it's a huge, huge effort, but it has obviously been extremely effective. And they now have grey partridge nests right up near the fences, even though the dogs are always the other side. And they just know, they've learned that that's okay. They're safe there. So that's a great, the idea of mowing, as you say, all the footpaths around us. Part of the reason people stray is it's much easier in the summer to walk across the stubble than it is the overgrown footpath.
The path, yeah.
2 meters the other side of it, which is just full of brambles.
Yeah.
And so that's absolutely something to do.
There is a really tricky balancing act, because the whole kind of get off my land, you know, stereotype is one I think that we would do well as a community to try and move away from. But at the same time, we do want to say, but not that bit. You know, happy for you to be around, but don't go over there. And it's about whether is it a question of giving an inch and that a mile is taken, and how you find that balance, I think is probably going to depend on who you are and your relationship with that particular bit of ground and what's going on.
There's got to be a blend of these options here, because when you go back to the chat posting on the Facebook page, if you do that with the backdrop of you've seen all the signs over the farm, you understand what we're up to, and you use words like our wildlife. I am responsible for a large chunk of our wildlife in this area, and I'm really passionate about it. This particular person is upsetting our wildlife. You know, that sort of narrative would help to try and change that.
A series of increasingly terrifying signs. So you start off with the fluffy one, and then you go to adders, and then you go to high-powered rifles, and finally landmines.
Yeah. Spring gun set. Yeah. I think one of the nothing beats can beat actually a very canny gamekeeper. Because a very canny gamekeeper, there's a chap I know called Rod Hazel, who's a keeper at Frossenden down on the Suffolk coast. And his boss is 100 years old, literally 100 years old. And he said, oh, yes, he said, I've got the best form of, he said, you know what the greatest predator, he said, of game and wildlife is? He said, it's a cockapoo on a flexi lead. He said, but I've got Rod. And what Rod does, and they have the Suffolk coastal path was bypassed through their chute. And Rod was very, very good, because he would appear suddenly out from behind a tree. And rather than saying, get off my land, he'd go and say, you know, you're actually off the path here. And then what he'd do is he would go and find out what it was they wanted. And he said, here, if you go down that way, he said, you might just go and see, if you look in that hedge along there, you might just go and see a dunnocks nesting along there. And he said he played this very cunning, clever, cuddly person to go and, so rather than saying, get off. And so he ushered them off. Although I have a story. When I was in Leicestershire, we had the New Age travellers move on to, this shows how long ago it was, in the 90s, when there were all those crusties all about. And they came on the old Great Central Line Railway, disused, ran through the middle of the estate. They bought all their caravans and buses and stuff along there. And the old man who owned the place, the Squire Delisle, he said, "Oh, Richard," he said, "you're ex-army." He said, "I'm sure you can go down there and see them off, can't you?" And I thought, oh, good, I'm going to get in the fight with crusties now. And so I went along there and I said, "Oh, hello." I said, "You know, you're not really supposed to be here." And they sort of looked at me as they would a serf. And I said, if you look at every single gate on Quenby, I said, it's a brick red colour with a white bar across the top. And I said, and that belongs to the Delisle family. I said, "Do you know who the Delisles are?" And they went, "No." And I said, "Well," I said, "he's the High Sheriff of Leicestershire, and he's a very important person." And I said, "That means he's the Queen's representative here." And they went, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "And that means," I said, "that we get the special branch and all that lot come around here all the time." I said, "So blokes with guns pretty soon are going to be coming along here and they're going to be getting rid of you." And they went, "Ooh, don't like that." I said, "Now, the good news is," I said, "if you look at all around here," and I said, "all the black gates with white tops," I said, "that's the Lowesby estate. And that belongs to Azal Nadir, who's currently a tax exile in Cyprus." I said, "So he's away." I said, "So you'll be fine. You can go there." And next day they're gone. And the old man said, "Oh, have they gone, Richard?" I said, "Oh, yes, don't you worry, sir. I've got rid of them." And 2 days later, I was in the pub, the Black Boy in Hungerton, and there's the shepherd from the Lowesby estate with a face like a smacked arse. And I said, "What's the matter with you?" He goes, "Oh, you won't believe it." He goes, "The New Age travellers are turned up. They're everywhere." I went, "Really?" I said, "That's terrible. That's terrible." And I was like, "Oh dear, all I've done is push the problem slightly along the Great Central Railway a bit."
Brilliant.
Oh dear.
So there's a number of potential solutions there, I think, for Muttley.
Yeah, just don't be aggressive with people, because like our local lady that we've got a lady down the road who's doing mega conservation work, and she has got tons of yellowhammers, and I absolutely love it when I see the yellowhammers. They're often 6 feet in front of us, that type of thing. But she never says hello. She only gets angry. She looks at you in a funny way. I've never actually met her properly, other than her sort of shout at me because the dog's not on the lead, even though the dog's incredibly well trained and fully under control. And I just think that when I talk to other dog walkers around here, they're like, "Yeah, she's doing some great work, but isn't she just a bit of a bitch?" And that in turn makes people go, "Oh, sod her and whatever she's up to." You see, you just don't be a complete arse. Like, try and be polite about it, I think, is probably another important point.
I mean, the only other thing I would say about this is it's very easy to blame the dogs. But I mean, if they've not been running the shoot for a couple of years, maybe some of that understory has grown up in such a way as to make their penwood not as attractive a place for pheasants to hang out as it once was. There's always that. So I would just double check that, you're making sure that your pen is absolutely as good as it can be. And I'm sure it would benefit from a little bit of coppicing or what have you. Nearly always does, doesn't it?
Well spotted on that part, yeah.
Yeah, and possibly go and put all the best keepers I know, particularly those who keep wild birds, and you're trying to go and keep them in a spot, is you put a bit of straw down, you trickle a little bit of food in, make those pheasants work extremely hard for their food, and then they're more likely to stay. If they're fed up easily within a couple of minutes, because you've got lots and lots of feeders around the place, isn't this brilliant? I've got a huge amount of feeders, and so therefore they're fed up. Now their crop's absolutely full, and they're going, "Well, I'm bored now." And then they wander off somewhere else. Is actually, supply plenty of food, but make them work hard for it. And that might be a better way of doing it. And feed them. If you've got an obvious problem with the fact you've got footpath walkers going through there, well, try and feed your pheasants in a different spot to where the footpath walkers are coming through. I mean, it seems to be that's possibly the more sensible thing as well.
A highly debated piece of correspondence.
It's good.
Thank you.
Really
Muttley.
good bit. I liked it.
Yeah.
What's next, Chris?
This one's awesome. Genuinely. I mean, he's up for best bit of correspondence into the pod ever, actually. You'll find out why in a sec. Dear Chris and George, having had the pleasure of making George's acquaintance recently at a charity fundraiser Clay Day in Wiltshire, and thus being enthusiastically introduced to the Guns on Pegs podcast, well done, George, also by several other guns.
Always working.
I spent the last couple of weeks traversing the globe as far as Auckland, accompanied by the extensive back catalogue to while away the long hours of steerage. I've been a Guns on Pegs member for many years, but for reasons unknown, I hadn't come across the podcast earlier. I must say, bravo to you both. Jovial repartee and wonderfully eclectic mix of guests from all corners of our sporting world, and some truly hilarious stories provided by many of the now members of the Noble Order of the Shooting Sock Garters. Close. During said day in Wiltshire, I was quite vocal about my belief that any attempt to appease what are, in contemporary parlance, termed antis, should be opposed, for it's a slippery slope, much like what we are now witnessing within hunting. While it's patently obvious to all that I hold strong opinions on matters many, I like to feel I hold them loosely, within the humility to admit my misjudgments. Having listened to many of your guests' eloquent deliberations on such matters, this is certainly one of those occasions where a more nuanced approach is required, and as such, I prostrate myself before the Guns on Pegs podcast altar for forgiveness. In common theme running through much of their commentary is the importance of education as to the ecological and social benefits of shooting and field sports in general, while bringing into our sport those who wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity to understand, or better yet, experience such benefits. The saying, "If you tell me I forget, if you show me I remember," comes to mind, and this brings me on to my next point. The final part of this balmy May Day in Wiltshire involved an auction, in which I had the good fortune to be the high bidder on a day's fishing on the famed River Test. Privately at the time, I knew I wouldn't be in the country to enjoy it. While I know many who would, in light of my previous musings, perhaps you would be so kind as to take charge of the matter and make arrangements for a worthy person fitting the bill as described to enjoy it. To add to the prize, and so that we can reward two deserving people, I'll sponsor a peg on a suitable day's shooting at a shoot found via Guns on Pegs to be awarded to another listener. With this, I bid you tight lines, hot barrels, and full glasses. Yours most sincerely, James.
Goodness me.
Wow.
What a good egg. Well, I'm quite happy to go and accept the fishing and, just let me know. I'll consult my massive, lengthy diary of invitations. Yes, I'm free whenever it is.
It is incredibly generous, isn't it? And
what a guy!
I had the pleasure of sitting next to James at lunch at this Clay Day, and yeah, he's a tremendously generous man. I think we owe him a huge thank you from us and the rest of the podcast listeners as well, because this is an incredibly generous thing that he's offering. The big question is, how do we do this?
Yeah. Just before that, one of my favourite bits of what he said here is this whole "let's bash the antis." Like there's so many people we meet who are of that way inclined, and George and I are in firm agreement on this. That's not the right approach, and I get kind of bored on shoot days when people are very, very vocal about that being the only way to do it, and we just fundamentally disagree. So the fact that he has had his mind changed by lots of different opinions on this pod is brilliant, and then to come at it with this angle, I mean, well done to him. So yes, George, how do we share these two prizes?
So what I'm thinking is the deserving is the big bit. So I suggest that we revive the Shooting Heroes segment, which has been on the back burner for a little while.
Yeah.
So we get people to write in and nominate their shooting heroes, but I think we need to be quite clear about the kind of person that we're looking for. Yeah, it's this show don't tell aspect,
exactly,
and bringing people into shooting who might otherwise not have been involved. Yep. So I think we're kind of looking for people who, what might they be doing? They might be like running shoot walks on their syndicate for the local school, or always being the one who takes the youngsters under their wing on syndicate days or on shoot days. Like a track record of introducing people into shoot. I think if you've introduced one, that's great, but if you've introduced 20. over the years. I think that's, the kind of thing we're looking for. I don't know, getting people out beating, that sort of thing, like a track record of bringing loads of people in through beating, with that kind of stuff.
Any of the above and anything else that inspires you to think of. If there's someone in mind, please message in. Well, first of all, providing we'll fit as many into the airing as we can, and then I assume our decision is final, George.
I think so.
We get to choose one each. You get to choose the fishing person. I'll choose the shooting person. And off we go.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds good. So we'll just run it for the fishing date. I think is at the beginning of August. So we'll need to run it for 2 or 3 episodes, I think, to give people enough time to plan for that. But don't hang about. Email in your nominations. And I'll tell you what we'll also do, just to add to it, is we will give both winners and also their nominators, whatever the word is for the people who nominate them, a set of garters as well. I think we should do that. Good idea. So pod@gunsonpegs.com is the email address, as usual. A huge thank you to James.
I was just thinking, if we queue them up and we do a Shooting Heroes episode,
that'd be fun.
And we try and get as much of the correspondence in as we can, all the different discussions with a really good guest who would be really appropriate for this sort of thing.
Yeah, it.
And we then release that, let's try and do that maybe. Oh, hold on. Can we do it at the game fair?
That's a great
it's
idea.
A bit close to when is the game fair? Isn't it the last weekend?
But we could tell
the winner before.
Just before. And they might be at the game fair and then we can do it on stage.
Now that is quite a good plan. And it'll save me from having to write a script for that episode, which was a bit of a challenge last time.
It's all about you, George, isn't it? It's always all about you. If someone does an altruistic thing.
Richard, I'll tell you, last year at the game fair, I was sitting in our fridge van trying to write the script about half an hour before we started recording because I hadn't had a chance the week before to write it. And then it was so sunny, it was the only place I could see my laptop screen was actually in the fridge.
It was hot, wasn't it? I had to go do a load of interviewing, and I'd been given this amazing jacket. There's a lady down the road in Dis who takes old tweed jackets and then she adds additions to them. So like a really fancy collar and the pockets. All of a sudden she'd found this fabric from the 30s that had pheasants on it and basically just tarted this thing up. But I said I'd wear it at the game fair to do this interviewing thing with various people at the game fair, and so I had to wear this damn very heavyweight old tweed thing, and all I got on this sort of interview thing was pictures of this sweating, puce-faced individual saying, "Tell me about conservation." Then I looked like a sort of a badly dressed transvestite with a heart problem. It was not good.
Can I just clarify for those now thinking this pod is really scripted, that George chooses a couple of bits of correspondence and a few questions to ask someone that we know exactly what to ask them already. So it's
fair point. It isn't scripted, as you might have been able to tell actually over the last 70 odd episodes.
I gleaned that.
I will absolutely hand it to you, though. I have no idea about the correspondence before I arrived about 5 minutes before, so thank you for doing that.
Good. Okay, well, again, I can't say thank you enough to James because I think it's an amazing thing that he's doing there.
Yeah, I mean, he's almost winning the shooting hero thing himself, isn't he?
Well, yes, except he obviously can't be there. I wonder, is this the first time, Chris, that we graduate someone straight from garters to hat?
Oh, yes.
I think we should do that. I shall find out James's hat size.
Do we have a name of this hat? This really ridiculous hat that we have?
The hat.
Just the hat. Richard, there's this, we've got like a polka dot, various colours polka dot sort of tweed flat cap,
right?
That only gets a lot of comments every time we wear it. But it is only to those that have gone well above and beyond. And James, he's straight in there with that. So
yes, agreed. So you're going to thank him by making him a pillar of ridicule. Yeah.
And then they ask, "What is all this about?" And he just gets to tell them he's a really nice guy.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Good. Right, so Muttley, James, and now you, Richard, are the newest members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters and will very soon be in receipt of a set of the much-coveted Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters. If you too have got a shooting confession, quandary, or a query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or if you've got an unpopular opinion, or if you'd like to tell us about a drive with a particularly good name, or if you want to nominate a shooting hero, drop us a line to pod@gunsonpegs.com.
There are some questions, but I haven't even looked at them. So before I ask, Richard, I think if Patrick Galbraith told me that from your writing side of things, that you must have been writing for a while, but he said that there was some sort of competition in shooting times, and that's how you got your column going in there. Is that correct?
Well, it is. I mean, he claims he'd put a competition out, and you were supposed to win a case of Black Isle Brewery beer or something if you put an article into him. And I never received this, although he dines out on this thing of how he discovered me, in exchange for beer. I've never received this, but I'll let him off because he is a good mate. But yeah, I mean, basically what I did was that when it was more or less immediately after he'd taken over the Shooting Times, and I could almost smell that there was this sort of youthful breath of fresh air had suddenly hit this old stager. And I sent in, it was around sort of September time when all the kids go back to school. And, at the time, I think my son was about 4 or 5. And, you see these photographs on Facebook or whatever of these poor, scared, rabbit in the headlight children clutching a satchel, dressed up in an oversized school uniform because their parents have bought it 2 sizes too big, so they're going to grow into it. And they're sort of outside their gate. And that was when I first took wildfowling up, because I'd never been wildfowling before, and I decided that it was going to be one of those things I'm going to do. So that September was going to be my first season wildfowling. And so as a result, I actually wrote a very short article about how I was equating it, much the same thing that it was my first day at school, because I went with the club's treasurer, Terry Eulis. He had taken me off, and I'd slightly worn the wrong kit, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and thankfully I didn't get bullied and pushed into a muddy dike or anything like that. And I just equated it to that, and I really thought nothing of it, that it would be just a sort of flash in the pan, and I'd managed to scratch that itch and send it off. And the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, there was one chap on Twitter who actually photoshopped the Shooting Times front cover and just called it the Negus Times in the end, because I appeared so regularly as a writer and on the front cover. Although I know Tom Paine did more often, because I think he's better looking and more youthful than me, that he appeared more often than I did. But my dog's better than his, because I don't think he actually even owns one. So therefore, my dog Mabel has appeared on the front cover of the Shooting Times countless times. And so for the 7 years I wrote for the Shooting Times, it was something that basically during Patrick's tenure, or 6, whatever it was, he did. But I still await that beer. So, at some point, I would like to think that some Black Isle beer will appear from him, sent through. But no, knowing him, it'll probably be a Campari or something like that.
I'm going to message him right now.
Yeah, send him. So Negus wants his beer.
When Patrick came on the podcast, he was drinking some cocktail that he'd made up of, random things that he found in the cupboard. I'm pretty confident Campari was involved.
Yeah, he's very louche. He's a dilettante.
He is. We've actually got some very keen listeners who keep a spreadsheet of all the drinks that people have had when they come on. So they will.
No one else has had this.
I'm certain they haven't. They'll be very excited. But they will be able to tell us whether Patrick was drinking Campari or not, or whether I'm wrong. But Richard, we were talking about kind of outreach and that kind of thing, and I think you do quite a lot of that, don't you? In one way or another.
Yeah. Yes. And I suppose it started off really with, my son. I thought, well, I learned so much off of myself about the countryside and shooting and just how to be a naturalist, basically, courtesy of 1 or 2 older figures in my life who taught me that's the song of that bird, and that's how you cast a fly, that's how you shoot straight, this is how you farm, all these things, how you lay a hedge, indeed. And I thought, well, with my son, I want to make sure that I give him that time. And so I then started writing series about not just taking him out and doing stuff, but I took some of his schoolmates out beating for the first time, and a lot of them sort of came from Nigeria and places like that. He has these boarders at school who are largely African, and taking them out beating was an absolute fascinating thing, not only for them, but also for the guns, because, you know, these guys, they were sort of learning so much off these kids too. And so that almost inspired me. So I was being quite mercenary, really, because I was getting paid to write about doing something that I'd have done out of choice. And then that led me down the line of thinking, well, people are fascinated by laying hedges and what you do. And so practical conservation is something that so many people are interested in. So I started thinking, well, who really needs to know how to do this? And so young farmers clubs became, I was a young farmer myself when I was young. And, you know, I got involved with them, showing them how to go and lay hedges. And then I roped in some of my two pals who work for the RSPB. They work for Operation Turtle Dove, and Mark Nowers, who's the Essex Operation Turtle Dove dude, he's absolute expert on moths and butterflies. And so we'd show these young farmers groups how to set up a light box and trap moths and to learn what species they are in there and identification and all that sort of moolah. And also I do this series I wrote about in Scribehound with, which is called the Suffolk Schools and Farming Fair each year at the Suffolk Showground, where they just let bunches of primary school kids come around, and I show them about hedges, what lives in hedges, and how you plant hedges, how you lay hedges, and all that sort of stuff. And it's something that I feel that from educating young people, I get a lot out of, and I can see just what a massive skills gap there is with young people knowing so little about the countryside and what lives in it and how our food gets from farm to fork. But also I found that aunties, people who don't like shooting, etc., are not actually that common. If you just live your life in social media, you would think that that's all there is. Yeah. But out in the real world, and a lot of it is the fear of the unknown, that I don't know what you're doing. Why are you doing that? And if you explain and you show people, and so therefore I think, well, I'd much rather them go, oh, well, yeah, well, some of them shooting people, they're gits, but he's all right. I thought, well, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I so yes.
And it's kind of filling a vacuum, isn't it? There's a kind of knowledge vacuum in these people's heads, and it depends on who's going to fill it. You know, either it can be filled with sort of misinformation gleaned from certain people on social media or on the telly or whatever, or it can be information coming from us, and we might as well be the people to fill that gap.
And I think what the problem is with the mainstream media, and if you look at the nature output that we get, people get very misty-eyed about the days of David Bellamy and the Wildlife on One when Attenborough was still a young man, and things like Out of Town. What they actually those programs did so cleverly was that they educated people. They showed them something and said, wow, look at this, and this is how it works, this is why it does it. You know, I remember I once watched a Wildlife on One program about the robin, you know, something you think, that's just a robin, but then a whole hour's worth of the intricate savage life of this very common bird. I had my eyes open. Unfortunately now there seems to be a mindset that you've almost got to caveat every single bit of information that you've put out there with a justification, or you can say, oh, well, as a result of us doing this, these are now fewer. Well, yeah, but I mean, I get infuriated by the RSPB saying nature's in crisis, we can do it, act now. Educate people to actually love birds and love habitats. They're much more likely to go and give a toss about it. Just telling them the end of the world is nigh is just going to make most people run off scary into the woods and let their cockapoo off and say, well, I might as well just go and let it run about now because no one gives a toss.
It's so true. Yeah. 2024 and sensationalism, it's just set in forever, hasn't it? And just the ability to talk normally and communicate normally now is gone. But it is like, I think that's almost a known tactic though with the charities. You know, you don't raise money for charities unless you paint the worst possible picture. And that is the playbook for charity fundraising. So it's a shame, but you're right. I just wonder whether it ever changed, but hey ho. Two things. Firstly, Patrick says he's cycling to Suffolk now with your beer.
Good old boy. Yeah, he's probably going to stagger off his bike somewhere on the A12 due to an overdose of Campari.
And secondly, that mention of the Suffolk show, the charcoal burning story that you wrote on Scribehound, just a quick one for those who haven't read it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's part of the educating point you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, basically, each year hedges are a bit samey, really, if you think about it. So, we'd laid some hedges the previous year, and this year we sort of went, and what we're going to do? And my business partner, Richard Gould, said, well, why don't we go and we'll burn some charcoal that's come out of his woods that he coppices, that we go and harvest our stakes and binders from. And yeah, we lit a charcoal kiln up there, which then in its first bit, when you first start burning charcoal, this acrid white smoke comes out, and it's mainly steam, and it's very my eyes. And that went straight into the Suffolk Wildlife Trust tent, where some earnest chap with a great big sort of Father Christmas beard was then sort of he gritted his eyes for a little while, and then eventually sort of came over. So you're gonna have to put that out because it hurts, which we then did. But thankfully on Blue Pea Presenters we had some more we made earlier. And we were now at a bit of a loss as to what we were going to do, because our charcoal burn was now doused. We've sharpened some stakes, and we thought we were going to do that. And Goldie, my business partner, he actually started cleaving some chestnut into little shingles. And I said to one little child, I said, what's your name? And I wrote it down with some charcoal. Well, this was catnip to these kids. They say, well, you can write with it. Well, oh, yes, no, you can do this, you can do that with it. It's very good for the soil. It's good. You can even eat it. I said, because, if you have filtered water, well, that was a stupid thing. So every single child then wanted their name written down, but then they were picking up these handfuls of stuff, and their teeth ended up black. There were kids walking around the Suffolk Showground looking like something from a sort of early 1970s black and white minstrel show thing, because they were all covered in black. And then it was oh shit. And you see the teachers eventually were sort of trying to bypass us, because they thought, we don't want the kids going and getting covered in all that black shit that we've seen the other people doing. But they came to us because they wanted to get their hands on charcoal. And it was capped off that we realised we'd really succeeded / failed, was when some bus driver came up to us, and he was from an Ipswich school, so would ferried 2 classes back and forth, because the Suffolk Showground's on the outskirts of Ipswich. And he came along and he put his arms on it. He goes, right, so you're is responsible for this, are you? He goes, just look at the state of my bus. And he got his phone out and he's shoving it in our faces, and it looked like, a load of yardies had been in and were tagging their various gangs that they were in, because the whole thing was just covered in charcoal. And so, yeah, it didn't go down quite so well, but they learned a lot about carbon.
Education has to be fun. It has to be fun, and it was definitely fun.
Yeah, they enjoyed themselves, the little devils. I did hedge planting this year at the Suffolk Schools farm event, because it was just safer putting new hedge plants in the ground, which I am glad to say. I went to the Suffolk show just yesterday, and I went to have a look at them, and they are still there in their tubes. No one's run them over. Obviously, the Suffolk Showground have looked after them, and so they're all still growing. So next year, I think we're going to show them how to actually grow from seed hedge plants, because I think that, although they'll probably go and end up eating hawthorn berries, and they'll have diarrhea. It'll be worse than charcoal in your bus.
You said earlier that hedges are a bit samey, and I kind of know what you mean. But I've become increasingly fascinated with hedges recently, partly from the Beyond the Hedge episode that you did with Patrick on hedges, and partly from reading your pieces and visiting Arundel, where hedges are, or Peppering, I should say, where hedges are a big part of what they're doing there. And it's a funny old thing, because I think sometimes when we look at the countryside, we kind of don't see the hedges, even though they're there. They're kind of, if you'll forgive the not quite pun, you can't see the wood for the trees. You look at the landscape and you see a landscape, and the hedges are there, but it's almost like the hedges kind of frame it, and you don't. The eye kind of slides off them. And now I've been sort of looking with a bit more care. And I was interested in what you were saying earlier as well about hedges, obviously originally being effectively fencing for livestock, and that's not what they're for now.
No.
So why are people managing hedgerows now? Why are people paying you to come and manage their hedgerows?
The first hedge, the oldest hedge in Europe that they know of, was found bizarrely just outside Peterborough, which in the middle of the fens, you would not think that was the place where you'd find a hedge, because now largely is a fairly hedgeless part of the country. But that was 4000 BC. So that's really the proto start of farming. In fact, that sort of convinced them that they were far farther advanced. And it was always a man-made construct, the hedge. It kept things in, it kept stuff out. And in a way, although now we have barbed wire and electric fencing, and here in East Anglia, very little livestock really, so to speak of, the hedge still keeps stuff out, be it people with cockapoos, be it a car driving along a road, but also it's a filtration system. So, we put huge amounts of nitrates into the soil, chemicals, etc. Those root systems of the hedges, they are keeping out that runoff into ditches. That's sucking all that stuff up. It's sucking up carbon. That's hugely important. They're also very much understood now that they are hugely beneficial for insect life. It's a place where things overwinter. It's where eggs are laid. It's where predatory insects come out of. So therefore, they then fly out into the field. They go and kill stem flea beetle and all those various things that we don't want. And hey presto, you've got your living, breathing pesticide of the organic version lives within the hedge. So that's very good for farming. It stops soil erosion. With this year, we've had terrible floods and hedges have stopped soil erosion. You're losing that valuable, top inch or so of soil. So they're hugely important. But I think why they're still so important here now is because they are fully realized as what habitat they provide. I know that 75% of all the work we get, I wouldn't say it was wholly led by shooting, but I would say that it was certainly one of the drivers, because people know that if you have decent hedges, you're more likely to keep hold of game. It's the lee of the hedge where the grey partridge nests. It's the lee of the hedge where the pheasant nests. The French partridge, well, those stupid things will nest wherever they decide to do. But it's something whereby, if you've got a drive and you can go and get your hedges in the right place, or you can work where you put your pegs around that hedge, they can quite frequently be the difference. You can make French partridges turn almost into English partridges if you drive them right over a big hedge. So I wouldn't say that our customers, which are nearly all to a man and woman farmers, I wouldn't say it was solely shooting that they're doing it for, but it's one of the drivers for it, because most of our conservation-minded farmers have a shoot of some shape or form. Around here, there are not that many that are putting a lot of birds down. We are fortunate in the fact that I could shoot 6 times a season here and get invites to wild bird pheasant shoots that are basically they're my punters, they're my customers, and they can truly put on a day where you're having a good day shooting all on wild birds. I mean, obviously someone probably put most of them down at some point, and they've all come here because we've put all this habitat in, and they're going, well, I don't want to be there because the dogs are running through it, and they haven't put any habitat in. And those blue feeders aren't half as interesting as all those wonderful cover crops and thick hedges that you've got around about the place. But I would say that the hedge is the modern conservation tool, bar none, and that people have learned to love them again. But the reason why farmers took them out in the first place is because they had lost their agricultural use. And because 4,000 years ago, someone planted one to make a sheepfold out of, we forgot to tell the farmers what modern usage the hedge had. And that's what really my business has been. But when I set it up, I spent 2 years trying to make a business case to farmers as to why they could and should manage their hedgerows better. And as luck common sense or whatever it is has happened, lots and lots of people have come along with me and they said, yeah, that's what we must do. And, my order book is full.
Coming back again to the kind of thing, we don't really think about hedges. You think about hedges in shooting, like on a shoot day, you probably think about pushing partridges over a hedge. But I know from here that the hedge line will often tell you, if you're standing on a peg, you'll get a pretty good idea about where those birds are going to go, because the more often than not, I find anyway, the birds will follow that hedge, and that's why
shoot, definitely,
and that's why numbers 4 and 5 are always either side of the hedge, because that's where they kind of generally want to go. It's sort of a signposted motorway for them. And there's a bit of fieldcraft in there that I hadn't really thought about until today when I was thinking about this podcast. I'm thinking, oh shit, that does happen. And it's
when you arrive at that drive and you see your pegs on the hedge, you're like, oh, perfect. That's always the first feeling. You're absolutely right. They follow it, and that must be because of everything you were just saying. They nest there. They use that as their sort of safety run. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So it's just home. So fly down the top of it.
I think it's one of the fascinating things, because I do a lot of wild pheasant shooting here. Is that when you watch a wild pheasant, especially a hen, when she bursts out of cover, she gets up there and you watch her head. She looks left and right and she goes, well, you shouldn't be there because you're not usually there when she sees those guns. And she'll turn and she follows a planned route in her head. People think pheasants are stupid, but if they've managed to survive, and particularly those old hens, if they've bought off a brood or two, they're pretty canny girls, really. And you watch them, and they follow contours, and they know where they're going. So anyone who says a pheasant is easy to shoot, you don't have to fire them off the top of a cliff in the West Country. Shooting a wild East Anglian pheasant is a pretty hard old thing, because you use the word fieldcraft, and I think a lot of people forget that. If you're shooting a wild bird, fieldcraft is hugely important, even on a driven day, because those things, they know exactly where they are because they were born there, they've reared their young there, and they know every inch of that ground. And it's quite fascinating watching them turn on their tail and going in a direction. And a lot of the time, as you say, they're following that hedge line because that is actually home. And because they haven't got a pen they're flying to, that they're flying to a place that they know is safe. You don't know what they think is safe, but they do. And you can look very silly on supposedly easy Suffolk pheasants because they ain't that easy.
Yeah, and a hedge is often also something that links two woods. And if you've got two woods, there's a fair chance that one of them's got the pen in and one of them's where they're fed and pushed from. So it is a kind of straight line back home often as well.
The hedge is the great linking feature. And if you think about how a lot of whether you're putting in blocks of maize or whether you're putting in AB8 and AB9, all these wonderful sort of wildlife friendly options, you're putting them in blocks. Well, your sensible option is to try and link those up with healthy hedges, make them motorways. I call them arteries of the landscape that they go around. So you link each node of important habitat block. That might be woodland cover, that might be a block of wild bird seed, it might be a block of pollen and nectar, it might be a pond, it might be a little bit of a wetland area. But if you link them together with hedges, then that tends to be a better way, going back to Muttley's thing of how do I keep these things? You need to connect habitats together, because if his pheasants are just going disappearing off the farm, then he's probably not doing it right. But if he's actually discovering that they're not in that wood, but they're over there, all they've done is they've followed your network of habitat, that you've put in or you've
wildlife corridors, isn't it? The jargon. Yeah.
So if you're a sort of syndicate or a shoot listening to this or involved in whatever way, and obviously they can get you in to sort the whole place out, of course. But let's say they don't. What are you looking for when, let's say you walk around a shoot now and you see the state of hedges? What are you looking for, and what are you looking for it to be? What are the practical sort of conservation techniques that you think they should employ to better their shoot as well?
there is a, I ought to put this on Scribehound really. There is we do hedgerow management plans starting from immediately after harvest. We have about 2 months, July and August, where we are doing hedgerow management plans. And that is essentially doing a stock check of what your hedges look like and then putting management prescriptions forward. And we give them a rating.
And that's kind of what you're doing it then, because that's when they're at their fullest, right?
At their fullest, yes. And it also means that we can get around on the stubbles. So it means that we can actually cut around, because last year, I think we did about 600 kilometres of hedgerow mapping in Suffolk and South Norfolk, which if you try to walk all that, well, I would lose my fat belly, but I mean, I'd also sort of be dead. You wouldn't be able to do it. So we take the truck and we drive around and we jump out. Right, let's look at that. And what am I looking at is the overall condition of the hedge. And you've got to think about the most important thing about the hedge is not its height. It's not even how long this thing is. It's what's happening down at the base of it. And have you got gaps? Because you use the word connectivity. Are you losing that connectivity because there's gaps in it? And so therefore we'll give it a score with H1 being it's been flailed and bashed for so many years that it's this scrubby little thing that's about sort of 2.5 foot tall and has got, gaps in it that you could drive a car through. All the way up to H10, which is basically the hedge has been left alone for such a long time, it's turned into a linear wood. Now, H1 is always rubbish because it's lost all its biodiversity value. H10, on the other hand, a great big linear wood, that's not necessarily terrible. A turtle dove would say, thank you very much, I like that, that's great, that's perfect for me. So you might keep that in a mosaic of hedges on a farm, and quite frequently boundary hedges end up like that, for rather boring reasons that grants don't give you access to both sides of the hedge. So therefore boundary hedges between farms get knackered up. But you're then looking at what the options are because you want a mosaic. And by that, what I mean is that if you had every single hedge exactly the same, it's like a monocrop. It's no good. You don't want them all at the same height. So all these people are getting very excited about hedgerows for carbon. They're actually terrible because what they've worked out is if you have a hedge which is 2 meters tall by 2 meters wide, it sequesters this much carbon and that'll be fantastic. Well, that's absolutely terrible for a bullfinch because a bullfinch wants to nest in a hedge that's 4 meters high. So you've just basically denuded bullfinch habitat across the board, but hey, we've saved carbon. Well done us, environmentalists, we've done particularly well. So we try and get a management plan whereby we look at what hedges need what and when over a 10-year period. And then we do another one in 10 years' time. And then we do, for the same farm, another one, because you're then eventually trying to work it that you're going to be managing your hedgerows on a 20-year cycle. So it might be that you are going to coppice that hedge in year 1. You then, because it's grown so big, the bases have become absolutely enormous. You can't really lay it. It's become bare in the bottom because it's grown out. We'll coppice that and then we'll revisit it in 5 to 7 years' time, and that'll probably, here in East Anglia, the growth rate we have here, will be ready for laying. Now, there's a younger hedge in the next field, which was planted 12 years ago, still got its plastic guards on. Well, that one's ready for laying now. There's a hedge that's been further on that was managed quite well. It's been trimmed relatively nicely. It's been well looked after. Well, all we need to do with that, Mr. Farmer, is you're going to incrementally cut it. So you're going to knock it back a bit with your flail in year 1, and then incrementally let it get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we create this map on a farm. In actual fact, it's rather handy. Has it here is a map of one particular farm, and there's ends up with lots and lots of numbers all over it, of all these various numbers, which correspond to the years we'll be doing this on. This is the grant you can apply for. And to be perfectly honest, you as a shoot captain or the gamekeeper, you can do that, because all you really need to know is what is a good hedge and what's a bad hedge. And it's not actually rocket science to work that out.
Well, I was going to say, so to summarize, you want it nice and thick at the base.
Yes.
You want, regardless of what stage it's at, that's what you're aiming for. And then you're looking for a variety of different heights, different growth stages, etc. I have a dim recollection of hearing or reading somewhere that you can work out how old a hedge is based on the number of different species in it, the width or something. Is this bollocks or?
it's unfortunately one of these, that the hedge is a very peculiar thing. It's very parochial, like most things in the countryside. I'm sure one chap managed to, somewhere or other, some scientist, worked out the system, which he then monikered with his name. It's such an implausible and stupid idea that I've even forgotten the bloke's name who did it. I can plant you a hedge with 10 species in it tomorrow, and round here you'll be getting a hedge that looks fairly mature after 8 years. So he reckoned that if you'd got 10 species, that showed it was 100 years old. Well, I can guarantee you that isn't going to happen. Here in East Anglia, for example, field maple usually wins the race in hedges. So if you don't touch a hedge, the other species that are in there will start to dwindle and fail, because the field maple romps ahead and starts to shade out and take over that hedge. So you end up getting linear lines of field maple that has more or less killed off the other species, and they're dwindled away. So no, it's largely an old wives' tale. I'm sure perhaps in some particular location with a certain soil type, he was able to see a reoccurring feature where there were 10 varieties in. But I know one of my good friends and a regular customer of mine, a chap called Jeremy Squirrel. Now, I always say this.
What a great name.
Life would be terrible if a conservation-minded farmer wasn't called Jeremy Squirrel. And thankfully, he's a very conservation-minded farmer, is Jeremy. And he's on part of his farm, his hedges were mapped by one of Charles Darwin's mentors back. He was the village parson, and he mapped the wildlife and the species that are in there. So we know that those hedges were mapped and plotted, and that they are at least from the 1840s, probably before that. I reckon they're probably the remnants of Enclosure Act by the size of the fields. They're probably Enclosure Act hedges of some time. So they might be from the 1700s. And they are, I can show you there's not 10 different species in there. There are 6 at best. So, no, I mean, you will get certain plants grow better. You know, I went to school down in Dorset, and hedges there were largely blackthorn, and blackthorn grows particularly well for a hedge there. If you look at hawthorn in Leicestershire, hawthorn grows differently in Leicestershire than it does here in East Anglia. If you go to the Brecks, the borders between Suffolk and Norfolk, a hedge in Breckland is as different as a hedge is here in mid-Suffolk, only 15 miles away, because of soil type. So no, I'm afraid you cannot do that. But it probably made this chap briefly famous for saying, oh, I've worked out this theory. And because he was a scientist, all his fellow scientists went, oh, well done, well done. If I said that, they would say, no, that's anecdotal rubbish, so therefore we're going to ignore you. So,
true.
That's the law. I'm afraid.
And therein lies another big problem.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you listen to this episode, you cannot go on your next dog walk without looking at that landscape differently than how you might have done before.
Yes.
And it's been absolutely fascinating listening to what you've taught me. And if
you want to know more about hedges, there's several things that you can go and do. I highly recommend the episode of Beyond the Hedge that the previously mentioned Patrick Galbraith did with Richard, and also a chap who's a sort of student of the history of hedges, a professor of hedges of some description. I can't remember his exact title now.
Beyond the Hedge not being a hedge podcast, but just a term for things in the countryside. Which is our Scribehound podcast, but happens to have an episode on hedges. And of course, look out for Richard's book, which is coming out the beginning of May next year. So yes, I'm fascinated with hedges. I'm sort of starting to get a bit geeky about it.
I'll tell you what I'll do. Seeing as you're giving away shooting and fishing, well, I'm far too poor to be able to give away fishing and shooting, but I will give away, if you want to someone who you think. I will take 2 people round, and on one of our hedgerow management days, so it might be a keeper, might be a shoot captain, someone like that, who's looking to go and improve their hedges. They'll have to come to Suffolk, because I'm not going anywhere else, because I only catch colds if I go out of Suffolk. But if they'd like to come here, I'm more than happy to take them for a day. I'll show them how Goldie and I look at it. Goldie, 2 times Purdy Award-winning erstwhile gamekeeper, now my business partner. He can show you from a gamekeeping point of view, I'll show you from the actual hands-on how you manage that hedge. Come and have a look at some. They'll be able to equate it back to their own. I'm more than happy to do that. So if you want to go and have two worthy people who would like to come and go and spend a day in the hedge with Richard Gould and I, then I will go and I'll go and offer that up, because I think that's much better than just showing someone how to lay a hedge. Laying hedges
Very kind of you.
Incredibly generous.
Yeah, so pod@gunsonpegs.com if you'd like that to be you. That's really good of you, Richard.
And I think the qualification there is you have to tell us about your favourite hedge.
What's the best nasty magazine you've found in the bottom of a hedge back in the 1980s? Which I have to say is one of the worst things about the internet. You know, I've only been a full-time professional hedge layer now for 10 years, right? But I first started laying hedges back in the 90s. And back in the 90s, you used to find all sorts of reading material back in then. And now, what do I find? McDonald's wrappers, that's it. Nothing, and old tins and the occasional shoe. Or one of those curious bottles that actually looks like it's containing that. You know, yes. I don't think that's water. That's why I don't like laying roadside hedges. Long distance lorry drivers sort of chucking it out the window.
Richard, the way we end these pods, as I think you know, is with our desert island shooting. So I hope you've given this some thought. The extinction level asteroid hits tomorrow. Your affairs are in order. Loved ones and enemies reconciled. Dogs fed. Tomatoes watered. Your last day shooting is what?
I would go wildfowling. I think I'd quite like to go to Holy Island with my best pal, as long as I can take a mate with me, with my best pal, Darren Sizer, who has taught me everything, or the little that I know about wildfowling. He's taught it all to me. And I'd quite fancy going up, because I love Northumberland. It's the only other place I could possibly even contemplate living other than here in Suffolk. And I'd like to go up to the Northumberland coast and go and take him with me up there, because I've had numerous holidays up there and I'm always absolutely astounded by just how beautiful it is, just how stuffed with wildfowl it is. And I think going on to Holy Island, let the flood wash in, there's going to be no one on there, and go and pit our wits against some of those Northumbrian ducks and geese. I think that'd be my dream, and have Darren to make me laugh.
This is Lindisfarne, basically.
Yeah.
And that does get talked about a lot in wildfowling circles. So it's not the first time I think Lindisfarne has come up, George.
I think possibly Ian Coghill.
Yeah, I think
another one for the spreadsheet keepers.
Yeah.
Well, if he's going to go, I won't go, because it'd be. I hate having people around me who are funnier than me. So I'd have to go onto the mainland, go up to more to Arnmouth or something like that. But I think it'd be certainly one of those. Let's say one of the Northumberland wild places, which I think you can truly say are still wild. I ran the Northumberland coastal path for the GWCT for their Grey Partridge Appeal. Yeah, that was a killer. That was my last ultra marathon I ever did. Yeah, Christ.
Oh, really?
Running along one of them bloody beaches and nearly died.
Your last ultra marathon.
Yeah, the last one. That bad.
It's not a sentence many can say.
No.
Brilliant.
Really enjoyable, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us, and well done with all of your brilliant articles on Scribehound too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, so before we go, all that remains for me to say is that there is a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sending us your unpopular opinions, or sharing a forgotten drive. You can also enter the competition to win the day's fishing or the peg on a shoot day by sending us
your choice.
In negotiation, I think. By nominating your shooting heroes, and you can win an opportunity to go and learn about hedges with Richard by sharing your favourite hedge. The email address is pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read out your submission in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters or enter you into the competition. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. In fact, I won't be in the next episode because I will be on holiday. So Chris will have a special guest host with him, but they will be back in a couple of weeks' time. Until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.